You are listening to The Central Cast, a podcast for mystics and misfits just like you, recorded every week in Pasadena, California, before a live audience. Thanks for tuning in.
Okay.
It's working great.
It's working great, okay. And it starts really early. How many of you were told by someone or somehow got the message when you were younger that you can't sing or that you can't draw? Anybody? Okay, well, not as many as normal, so that's good. But those tend to become self-fulfilling prophecies, and yet I had a professor in seminary who said that unless there is something physically, wrong, everyone can sing. And we just convince ourselves that we can't. One of the interesting things about singing is holding a tone is a lot of it's just about confidence. When we don't think we can do it and we're nervous, we actually don't hold the tone well, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. More on that in a second. There's a great poem by Wendell Berry called What We Need Is Here. Some of you may know it. I'll read it. It's really short. Geese appear high over us, pass, and the sky closes. Abandon as in love or sleep holds them to their way, clear in the ancient faith. What we need is here. And we pray, not for new earth or heaven, but to be quiet in heart and in eye clear. What we need is here. Now, a friend of mine, Amy McCreath, loved that poem so much that she put it to music. Just those words, what we need is here. In a very simple tune that we're going to sing together. And remember, everyone can sing. It goes like this. Just listen first and then sing. What we need is here. What we need is here. That's why I said listen first, then sing. Let's try that again. Just listen. Say it's two verses. I should have told you that part. Two times. Listen first. What we need is here. What we need is here. So the first place, it's different each time. Did you hear that? So now let's sing it all together. What we need is here. What we need is here. You're beautiful. Keep going. What we need is here. What we need is here. Now we're going to sing it a couple different times. We're going to roll through it. And then I'm going to say the word harmony. And you are invited as you want to either keep with the main tune or to branch into harmony. And we're going to see what happens. Ready? What we need is here. 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 Harmony. What we need is here. What we need is here. Here. One more time. What we need is healing. What we need is healing. Beautiful. We did that. We did that together. We created this beautiful music together. Now, how many of you tried the harmony? There's more than that. Come on, I heard harmony. Come on. How many of you tried just some harmony? How many of you tried harmony and got a little scared when you were trying it? And maybe, okay, well, don't raise your hands. Don't worry, I won't make you raise your hand. And that's what happens. That's how we do. I know the first time I try harmony, because I don't have perfect pitch. People who do have perfect pitch tell me it's a curse. Because I don't have that, I have to find my way, but then I realize the community carries me. And community gives us that space to experiment and to try new things and to do those things that we would be fearful of doing by ourselves. Now, there's probably not a lot of us. There's some of us, but there's not a lot of us who, if we said, you need to come up here and sing a solo, would be really running for this. Unless you're really, really confident about your ability to sing. And yet in a group, the community gives us the power, gives us the confidence, gives us the knowledge that we can create beauty in the context of each other. And that if I hit a wrong note, and that's a whole other thing, are there any wrong notes? But if I hit a wrong note, knowing that it's going to be okay, that I can not hit the note I was intending to hit, let's say that, and the community will cover it. We can do incredible things together. All those things that we have been taught in our life that we can't do, we can do if we do them together. One of my favorite poems is, in addition to that one by Wendell Berry, by Rainer Maria Rilke. During COVID, I preached this poem, and then Donnie and Randy here actually gave me this shirt, which has part of the poem on it. It's called Go to the Limits of Your Longing. I want to read it to you. God speaks to each of us as she makes us, then walks with us silently out of the night. These are the words we dimly hear. You, sent out beyond your recall, go to the limits of your longing. Embody me. Flare up like a flame and make big shadows I can move in. Let everything happen to you, beauty and terror. Just keep going. No feeling is final. Don't let yourself lose me. Nearby is the country they call life. You will know it by its seriousness. Give me your hand. I used to wear this shirt to therapy all the time. Let everything happen to you, beauty and terror. Just keep going. No feeling is final. It reminds me still that no matter what I'm feeling, I can feel it as deeply as I want, because at some point that feeling will dissipate and a new one will come. It really won't swallow me up, even though sometimes it really feels like it will. But then there's that last line to the poem, give me your hand. And I realize that part of why I can do this is I don't have to be alone. There is no limit to what we can do together. And by the way, this is why empires keep us separated. This is why empires keep us too busy to spend time together and addicted to technologies that isolate us. We're convinced of what we can't do because we're also convinced that we're alone. What has been so successfully marketed to us is what I just heard this morning Rebecca Solnit call an anti-connection ideology. Like, whoa, that's true. Think about it. Insurance in this country is a $1.7 trillion annual business. Insurance is just a failure of community. We need medical insurance, we need car insurance, we need all these insurances because if something bad happens, we have been told we can't trust each other to help us out. And so we have actually made it the law in some cases that you have to have like insurance if you're going to drive a car, because even if you can't afford it, if something happens, you're screwed. That's a failure of community. And it's part of why we tend to love justice until it gets risky, because when it comes down to it, we believe that if the worst happens, we're going to be alone. Churches are afraid of speaking truth because we are afraid of losing donors and tax exemptions. That's a failure of community. Believing that if we lost those things, we still wouldn't find ways to care for each other and be okay. I've actually spent the last kind of year and a half living this. I was senior pastor over at All Saints Church, which, at least till I got through with it, was one of the largest Episcopal churches on the West Coast. And I was living with my family in a 5-bedroom house that the church owned. I lost my job. I left my marriage. I spent a year living with 1 suitcase and 2 garbage bags full of clothing in the spare bedrooms of friends. And now I'm living in a 1-bedroom apartment a quarter of a mile from Skid Row with my dog, and I'm fine. I'm doing great because I have community. And when I'm not fine, it's okay because I have community. What I'm increasingly not afraid of anymore is taking risks, of speaking my mind, of standing with people who are being shot at. Now, I have been told that I have an underdeveloped sense of self-preservation, and that might be true, but I don't think that that's it. I think that I'm just beginning to really experience that whenever the thing I'm afraid of actually happens, it isn't so fearful after all because I have community. Because no matter what I'm feeling, no feeling is final. And someone is there saying, it's okay, give me your hand, turning the I into a we. And man, some of those feelings can be just killers. Some of those feelings can just be awful. And there's 3 in particular I wanted to spend some time talking about: discomfort, shame, and fear. I want to talk about those 3 things because in my life and in my experience, those are 3 of the biggest reasons that we don't do the work of justice that is really risky. And I want to share some stories about my struggle with those 3 things and more, and how can we move from being hopers and prayers for justice to speakers for justice to creators of justice and breaking the power they have over us. It all starts with the same thing, and it's give me your hand. First, I want to talk about discomfort. So I was in St. Louis in August of 2014 when a young black man named Michael Brown was walking down the street in Ferguson and was executed by a police officer. And St. Louis is one of those cities that actually never went through uprisings in the 60s. And so it had just kept itself segregated and kept people suppressed. And so the tensions and the anger and the grief and the pain had been building up for generations. And finally, this amazing group of young people said no more. And they hit the streets, and this incredible uprising happened. And I was invited by my friend Tracy Blackman, who's a UCC pastor, to go out there. And it scared the hell out of me. Oh my goodness. I grew up in a British household, and I love there's some of you know John Mulaney, the comedian. John, he talks about growing up in an Irish household. If there's any Irish or English people in this room, I do not mean Irish and English people are the same, because we'll have a fight if I say that. But one of the things we have in common is John Mulaney talks about growing up in an Irish household and says, you grow up in a household like that, you take all of your feelings, you put them right here, and one day you'll die. And we were watching that on TV, and my kids in unison turned and looked right at me. And so I was not comfortable with all these feelings coming out in the streets. And so I went to Tracy and I said, I've got it. I know what we need to do. We had been involved in this thing called Leadership St. Louis. And St. Louis is a big, small town. So we knew all these people who were leaders in St. Louis. I said, here's what we can do. We're going to get all these leaders in St. Louis together. We're going to have a series of teach-ins. We're going to learn what's going on here. We're going to fix it, and it's going to be fine. I tell that story like 12 whatever years later. It's like I can't believe I actually said that, except I can. And I hope y'all have friends like Tracy who will just get in your face and tell you like the truth you need to hear. And Tracy got in my face and she said, Mike, you've got to stop. She's like, this is your privilege talking. It was back before we had so weaponized that word against each other. She said, in your whole life, whenever you have felt uncomfortable, you have been able to do something and then feel comfortable again. She's like, you need to sit down in your discomfort. She said, you need to go out there and listen and listen and listen some more. And then when you're done, you need to listen some more. And then the first thing out of your mouth needs to be, this is what I am hearing. Am I getting it right? This is what I am hearing. Am I getting it right? And then she said, not in these words, but in her actions, she said, give me your hand. She didn't just send me out there. She said, we'll go together. I'll meet you out there. And we did. And for night after night and week after week and month after month, we were out there together. And it was deeply, deeply uncomfortable. And I did that work of listening. And what happened was my heart was changed. And my heart was not changed because I got an intellectual argument. My heart was changed because after I kept showing up and showing up and showing up, more people were saying to me, give me your hand. And I was saying to other people, give me your hand. And your experience became my experience. And I knew your name, and you weren't just a class of people or a face on the news. You were Brittany, you were Alex, you were Kayla. You came up to me and said family, solidarity, love. And it wasn't that we weren't uncomfortable anymore, but we were uncomfortable together. Now, another thing that started coming up for me when that happened was shame. As I started listening more and more, not just to the pain of the present moment, but the generation and generations of pain and grief that had happened that I had benefited from, that came at the hands of people who looked like me. One of the first things I did is I went to that shame place. I felt so bad. Now, some of you know Brene Brown, right? You ever heard of Brene Brown? Okay. I'm not getting okay, let's just you shout it out. It's okay. Brene has actually a really interesting job title. She's a shame researcher. I think that's one of those things you have to name yourself. I don't think anyone says, I'm going to go hire a shame researcher. But she had said something in one of her books, which I actually think has a point to it, but it had done something weird in my mind. And she said, there's a difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is I have done something bad. Shame is I am bad. And I actually do believe there's truth to that. Well, my theology is, we're all created in God's image and good. And so nothing good ever comes from shame. Because shame is a lie. Shame is telling me that I am bad. And I'm not. I'm created in God's image and good. And so I used to say, and I would say this from the pulpit, like nothing good comes from shame. And then there was this amazing psychologist in my last congregation, Brunelle Anderson, who came up to me once and she said, some of you all could use a little more shame. And she was right. And she sent me some information about Afrocentric psychology. And then another person sent me the writings of an amazing Buddhist writer named Pema Chodron. And Pema said something that just absolutely opened me up and blew me away. And she said, well, what shame is, and actually Brene and some of these other people had said this too, what shame is it's actually a disconnect. It's a disconnect between what your heart is telling you, this is how I should be living my life, and your actions. And you feel that disconnect, and you actually start feeling like I am bad. And that's not the point. But the point is there's that disconnect there. And what that is an invitation to is, as Pema Chodron says, let shame be your teacher. She said, listen to that disconnect, feel it, ask it, what does it have to teach me? What do you have to teach me? Now, in some cases, say you grew up in a place that says women should not speak in church, and you are having a courage moment and you're saying, you know what, I'm going to get up and speak in church, and you're feeling that disconnect. Well, sometimes it's that initial message of what you've lived with that's got to go. And then other times it's the opposite. It's like, oh my gosh, I believe that God loves all of us equally, and that and the church should be that place that the early church in Acts talks about, where everyone shared everything in common and each was given to as has need, and yet we still have people who are sleeping out on the sidewalk, and I'm feeling shame about that. What do I have to learn from that? Is the principle bad? Well, no, the principle's pretty good. But what I have to learn is, okay, there's ways I'm not living that. And I could either sort of go into what Brene calls a shame spiral, which becomes really self-indulgent, or I could say, okay, there's still a gap there. How do I work on it? Except, no, give me your hand. How do we work on that? And if we're not afraid of shame, if we can let shame be our teacher, if we can, instead of having it be like, oh, I'm bad, and centering our own feelings, to say, yeah, that feeling really, really sucks. And let's talk about how painful that is. And then, frankly, that feeling is not a bad thing, because it can be incentive to not feel that way anymore. And yeah, you can not feel that way anymore by suppressing it, or by telling the person who's pointing, raising the issue, is like, stop shaming me and go away. Or we can say, you know what? Okay, that's something that we can work on together, because together we can do incredible things. And then there's fear. And fear is what ties it all together. Fear is almost always, in my experience, and maybe you have other experience, but I can basically take any fear I've ever had and realize that it's about loss in some way. Fear of losing something. It can be fear of losing my life. It can be fear of losing security. It can be fear of losing a job. It can be fear of losing relationship. It can be fear of losing comfort. And fear, it's a very natural thing. There's brain chemistry involved in fear. Fear protects us. But in a society where we are continually told that we are on our own, we become more and more afraid, because the only thing standing between us and that which we fear are now the walls that we build up around ourselves. Instead of saying, you know what, I realize that the idea of something may give me a lot of fear. The idea of saying, I have to leave this life, I have to leave the house, I have to leave my marriage, that is scary as hell. And it's less fearful because I've got this friend who said, I've got this bedroom and you can stay there as long as you need to. It can be fearful to speak a truth in love that someone else in our family or in our friend group is going to get mad about. And so a lot of times we cannot do that, but it becomes less fearful if we have someone holding our hand while we do that. It becomes less fearful if someone, after we have said that really hard, courageous, uncomfortable truth, is willing to hold us while we cry and be like, oh my God, that was so scary. And they're like, I know, you did great. The answer to shame, the answer to discomfort, the antidote to fear, to all of this is community. It has to be personal. I've spent a lot of my life working among people who are living on the streets or in shelter, those among us who are housing insecure. And one of the things I have learned is a great liberation theologian named Gustavo Gutierrez, who says, you say you love the poor, tell me their names. And it's that we will never solve any issue, be it race, class, homelessness, you name it, if we think of it as solving it as an issue. We will only solve it when it becomes personal. When it's not, oh, we're going to end homelessness. It's like, I walk by Bob every day on the street, and I cannot bear anymore that we permit some people to be living on the sidewalk and other people we don't. I would have to burn so many bridges in my life before anyone allowed me to be homeless, because I have the kind of community where people care about me. And I actually know that for a fact, because I had nowhere to go and I had people inviting me in. We live in a world where we permit some people to be homeless and others not to be. And that's a failure of community. And so we can do anything if we do it together. And this is not anything new. One of my favorite stories in the gospel is at the end of the Gospel of Mark. And Jesus and his disciples, they've got an important place to go. They are headed to Jerusalem. That is where the story is going to reach its climax. And yet they are walking down the road, and there is a man named Bartimaeus sitting at the side of the road who can't see. And he is crying out, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And I love the disciples at this point, because what the disciples tell him to do is shut up. The disciples say, and we're so good at this. This is like church. I look in the mirror and see this. We are so good at saying, we have so many more important things to do, big things to do. The one little person by the side of the road, I'm sorry, be quiet. We're too busy. And yet the story says he cries out all the more, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And then Jesus does something incredible. He stops and he says, "Bring him to me." And this is where the disciples crack me up, because they act that they were like with Jesus' game plan the whole time. And they're like, "Oh, please, hey, come on. He's calling you, he's calling you." And it says Bartimaeus throws off his cloak. And if you know anything about those times, he wasn't wearing anything under that cloak. That cloak was all he had. And so he comes into the center of the community. He is standing naked in front of God and everybody. And Jesus asks him a question. It is, "What would you have me do for you?" So think about what just happened here. The institution of the church, the earliest institution, Jesus and the disciples and the crowd, is on their way to Jerusalem. This is not an unimportant place to go. There are many good arguments why they should not be distracted. And someone who is on the most outside, the furthest margin of the community, cries out, and the church stops, brings that person into the center of the community, and says, "You get to determine the agenda." There's not an assumption made. Jesus doesn't look at Bartimaeus and say, "Here, have a sandwich," because he thinks, gee, maybe he might be hungry. No, he asks him. He listens and listens and listens some more. And then when he's done listening, he listens some more. And Bartimaeus says, "If you can, I would love to see." And then the community does. I'm convinced this wasn't just Jesus. The community does what communities do, which is heal. Love in community is the most powerful force for healing and change in the universe. My friend Becca Stevens says that all the time. And Bartimaeus is healed, but not just his eyes. Because the second healing that happens isn't that Bartimaeus says, "Gee, thanks, Jesus," and goes off on his way. Because the end of that passage is, "And he joined them on the way." And so Bartimaeus became part of this community. This is the work of the church. The work of the church isn't so much what happened in Jerusalem. The work of the church is what happens on the way. Now, we're still walking to Jerusalem. We're still doing those important things. But every time someone cries out, we realize that's the work of the church, to take the people most on the outside, those of us. And every one of us sometime is on that outside, because every one of us is hurting sometimes. And we bring into the center and we say, "What can the community do for you?" It's why every time someone new walks into the door of this community, the community changes. Because it's not just about, well, how do we teach them to be like us? It is, how do we invite each of us into the center of the community and say, what does healing look like? We started some work at All Saints called Telling the Whole Story groups. And it was, we realized at the center of any kind of healing, of racism, of classism, or whatever, came first from this deep, deep listening. And we had to invite people to say, "If you will you come into the center of the community?" Now, I learned this in Ferguson. I learned this going out into the streets and into classrooms and into places where people very much unlike me, or so I thought, were, who had different circumstances from me. But then I learned that in many ways, a lot of the stuff that was important, we were alike. And I learned this because I am still 12 years later we are greeting one another with those words: family, solidarity, and love. And it starts with saying, go out and listen and listen and listen some more and sit down in your discomfort. And when I feel shame, say, okay, how can shame be my teacher? And when I start feeling afraid, I look for someone and says, who can say, give me your hand. I've learned this here in Los Angeles. One of the most amazing groups of people I know here in Los Angeles is one of our unions. It's Unite Here Local 11, which is the Hotel Hospitality Workers Union. They are absolutely incredible. Some of you may be members or you may know members. These are amazing, amazing people who, because at least before, and really still after the last contract, some have to drive 2 hours round trip to work because they can't afford to live in the city on the wages that we pay each other for that work. And what the people of Unite Here Local 11 have continually and continue to teach me is that same sense of family, solidarity, and love. Is if we put the most vulnerable among us in the center and we say, what can we do for each other? We all find a way to make beautiful music together. We all find a way to sing together. And then I would say by accident, but I think it's been providence, I would say I found myself in Minneapolis a couple weeks ago. And I've been invited there by a friend who's a pastor of a church in St. Paul's like 5 months before. And a friend of mine, some of you may know her because she used to be here at Fuller Seminary, Janelle Austin, who is now the executive director of the George Floyd Memorial. She texted me on the Saturday morning that I was there just getting out of the shower, and Alex Preddy had just been executed on Nicollet Avenue. And she sent me the video and she said, I'm on my way down there. Will you join me? Give me your hand. And so I said, sure, because that's what we do. We show up for each other when the person is crying by the side of the road. Sometimes they can't come to the center of the community. Sometimes the center of the community has to come to them. And I went out there and I ended up in a place that frankly was far worse than anything Ferguson had ever been, with sort of tear gas and flashbangs and all these things. And members of the community stepped up. There was a wonderful woman who owned a Vietnamese restaurant who just opened her restaurant. And when the tear gas came, we all poured in and she gave us water and made great spring rolls for us. And there was another restaurant that was like this Jamaican place that did the same thing. And what we found is that we could stand against ICE and the Border Patrol and the tear gas and the flashbangs and these little grenades that actually shot rubber bullets and exploded at us. We could do that. And it wasn't that we were not afraid. It's that we had said to each other, give me your hand. And that we listened to those who were living in the neighborhood. And it started because people who were living in the neighborhood had known who their neighbors were. And so when ICE came for them, they said no. Alex Preddy was executed because he was trying to help someone up who had fallen. And instead of the community scattering in fear at that message of, if you help your neighbor, you will be killed, the community came out and said, no, we help our neighbors here. We love our neighbors here. Those divisions of us and them that you are trying to convince us are true, we call bullshit on that because we know that we are one. There's a funny phenomenon, and I'm wrapping up, don't worry. There's a funny phenomenon that we have, which is we call people who point out that division already exists divisive. We get told all the time when we point out that there is division that we're being divisive, and we're not. We're pointing out that division, deep division exists. We are told wrongly that there are two sides to some of these conflicts and that we need to honor each side equally, when one side is about perpetuating division and the other side is not at our best. And believe me, the left, we can have our own purity cultures and we can be as divisive as anybody. But the truth is there is only one side and everyone needs to be invited onto it. And if your side is telling me that my sister, my brother, or my gender fluid sibling is my enemy, then I'm sorry, there is no other argument for that. If you point a gun at me and I'm standing by myself, it is terrifying. But I got to tell you, I have stood with a group of people and guns are being pointed at us. And it is still scary, but there is a courage that comes from community. There is a beauty that comes from community. And that is what those who are trying to scare us and separate us from each other do not tell us and are terrified of us knowing. Is that as we enter into those fearful spaces, the spaces that generate discomfort and shame and fear in our hearts, what we find instead, if we hold each other's hands, is incredible joy. That's where we find deep meaning in our life. That's where we realize that these hooks that have been in our flesh can be released. One of my favorite song lyrics was written by Bruce Springsteen. I didn't realize it until I just thought it was a Manfred Mann song, but it's from Blinded by the Light. It's Mama always told me not to look into the sights of the sun. But Mama, that's where the fun is. The places that we are told not to go, the risks that we are told not to take. That's where the fun is. That's where the joy is. Justice is not what we have to do. It's what we get to. With that, I would just really love to open this up and say, is anything that I have said touch something? Do you have a question, a story to share? A rebuttal is fine. But just to open up, where have you felt these things in your life? Or have you felt something different?
Yeah, I must just say this is what we do here. Usually it's Aaron up there, sometimes me, we share our thoughts, and then people disagree, they agree.
Rarely. So, hey, when you disagree, I learn. So that's great. Disagreeing is fantastic.
Mike, I was going to ask if you could speak a little bit more about your vision for spiritual communities, churches, and how they can, I don't know, be better at community organizing or community building in the ways, in the specific ways that you were talking about.
Right.
Politically, so to speak,
Yeah. So first of all, there's a fantastic book that is really becoming a structure for my life. It's a tiny book by a transgender activist named Dean Spade called Mutual Aid. And it really has to do with how do we come together as communities that support each other. And so that's the first thing that we do. There's a great church that was founded in Washington, D.C. years and years ago by a guy named Gordon Cosby called the Potter's House. I actually am going to answer your question. You'll find that like sometimes I take circuitous routes to things.
It's all good.
And Gordon was actually a chaplain during World War II. And he would sit with soldiers who would be flying air missions, and a lot of them weren't coming back. And he was so moved that these people would give up their lives for the cause of fighting oppression and fighting fascism. And then he came back to America, and he was in his 20s, and he would go into churches, and he was just astounded how little we were willing to give up for each other. And so he started this church, and he basically said, well, what if we, instead of saying we're going to try to appeal to the most people, what if we actually sort of took enter through the narrow gate seriously? And so like one of the things that he said was, if you're going to join, like anyone can come, but if you're going to join this community, then everyone actually is going to tithe. It's required. You have to give 10%, which means you get to keep 90, by the way. We're going to give 10% of your income to the church. But here's the thing. You lose your job and can't pay your rent. That's okay. The church will do that. Your car breaks down. You can't get to work. You can't pay it. That's okay. The church does that. You have medical bills that insurance won't cover. That's okay. The church will cover that because that's what community is supposed to do. And everyone gets to participate in that. And really what it was is, the first mutual aid community I'm aware of is in Acts. And so much of what, and I've experienced this in a lot of different churches, is our desire is, how do we go out there and fix things? And that's really, really good. And the first step is we look at our own community and we say, it's Gandhi. It's be the change you wish to see in the world. How are we with our community living in all, and it's hard holding that mirror up to ourselves. Believe me, most of the time we don't want to do it. But how are we living into the society in here that we feel called to build out there? Now, it's not you have to do it perfectly here before you do that. These things are done. It's dynamic. You do it at the same time. And the first thing that you do is you get to know each other and you get to know each other's situations. There is a thread throughout Scripture that is about knowledge of the community. There's a great passage where Jesus says, if you're taking your gift to the altar, and I read this passage wrong my entire life. I always thought it says, and if you have something against your sister, brother, then stop, go be reconciled, and then come back. Actually, it doesn't say that. It says, if you take your gift to the altar and you realize that your sister, brother have something against you, stop and go be reconciled. And what that means is you have to know the community well enough to know when people have something against you. And that's inside this community. It's the wider community. It's going out into the wider community and listening to people and being connected. And that's that work of putting people in the center. So part of what I would also say is, as we're doing this work here, and we're finding, well, where are the issues? Where is the part of humanity? Because you can't fix everything all at once, and you can't fix, but to say, well, what are we feeling really called to? Well, who are the people who are already doing this work? If as a community, you're discerning, we really want to stand against ICE and for the members of our community who are being actively targeted, well, then go hang out at the Pasadena Job Center. Go to Endelon, the National Day Laborers Organizing Network. Go talk to Pablo Alvarado. Go find folks like that and listen some more, because they already have the structures in place. So many of the times we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And then what we do is we build friendships and we build relationships. Pablo gives me a call, I'm there. And it's not just because I believe in the cause, it's because that's Pablo. And Pablo's amazing. And if Pablo gives me a call and says, hey, I need you here, I'm like, I'm there. Build relationships. I have a friend of mine who came here to this country from El Salvador about 25 years ago. And she works cleaning houses. And she's brought her whole family, or her whole family is actually, documented. She still doesn't have any documentation. And so part of, what we do, and she's been terrified, but part of what we do, because it's all about give me your hand in relationship, is I asked her, well, what can I do? What can we do? And we named a couple things, and there's a couple things that are easy. Like, first of all, whenever she leaves for work, she shares her location with me. And then I watch until she's there. And then we check in with each other. And then there are times when ICE is like going on the buses and doing snatch and grabs, that she can't do that, but she also can't afford to take Uber. So we're just like, great, we've got a mutual aid fund. Here, now you can take an Uber to where you're going. And so it's knowing each other, but it's, but that's out of the, if we did that for every single person, that's great. There's a brilliance to what's happening in Minneapolis, just with a whistle. And they distribute these everywhere. And if something is going down and ICE shows up, people just show up and start blowing whistles. And then the community comes. So nothing can be done in secret. And that they can decide, is this the time where we need to stand in front of someone, behind someone, or to the side of someone? But it starts with, and I think it's a challenge that I've seen here in Los Angeles, because LA is so big, that we start thinking about, well, how do we organize, citywide, metro area wide? When truthfully, neighborhood by neighborhood, it's about small communities. There is sociologists have said that the size of, and some people call it a tribe, is about 150 people. Because after that, you can't know everybody's name and remember everybody's name. So what are the small groups of 150, the small areas that we can just help by getting to know each other and saying, how do we build those relationships? Because the reason that people showed up on Nicollet Avenue was relationship. It wasn't a cause. They showed up because their neighbors were under attack. I showed up because a friend said, will you join me there? Building relationship has always been the coin of the realm. And so the first thing I would say is look at how you are building relationship here and keep leaning into that. How are you learning each other's stories? Keep leaning into that. How are you getting to know the community? There's so many things I would do differently if I had to go back into a congregation. One of the things that I never did at my last congregation is invite us just as a community to just walk around the neighborhood on a regular basis and learn and get to know people. And so, part of how we organize, first of all, you're already organizing. This is organizing. How are we sharing more and more in depth each other's lives? How are we being vulnerable with each other? How are we creating safe spaces, brave spaces where we can say, hey, you know what? I'm really uncomfortable. Hey, you know what? Shame is really starting to jump up and bite me here. Hey, you know what? I'm afraid. And where we can say, give me your hand. So much of what we think of as organizing is we think, okay, well, what's the goal? How do we, it's got to be relationship based. And this is actually, this is really solid social science. There's a guy named Marshall Gans, who was Cesar Chavez's lead organizer for the United Farm Workers in the 60s. And when Barack Obama decided to run for president in 2006, 2007, he was one of the first people that he reached out to. And did anyone ever work on Obama's campaign in 2007, 2008? Were you asked for your personal narrative in those trainings? No? Okay, well, this is what they did for us in St. Louis, is they would bring us together. And we just thought, we're going to be taught, like, well, here's the message. Here's what you say when you knock on the door. No, we spent 3 hours. And this is like some Saul Alinsky stuff too. We spent 3 hours, saying, what brings you here? What's your personal narrative? Tell me your story. And so when we left and that next Saturday showed up to go canvassing, everyone knew everyone else's name. Everyone knew why they were there. And they also knew why everyone else was there. And they could speak out of their experience. And then when they showed up and someone answered the door, they could not just say, hey, here's why you need to vote for this person. They would ask a question. We would ask a question and say, hey, I'm Mike. I'm with Obama for America, or whatever we were calling ourselves. And said, do you have a little bit of time to talk? And to say, what's going on in your life? What's important to you? Now, some people didn't want to have that conversation. Some people are like, what's this person standing on my front door asking me these personal questions? And that's okay. Then you hand them the information and then you go. But what you do in that moment is you build relationship and you build community. And I left that experience not just having campaigned for a candidate I believed in. I left that experience understanding what life was like in a neighborhood in a way that I had not understood before, because it wasn't my neighborhood. And it was beautiful and it was fun. And so it really is, fairly simple. First of all, find groups like Endelon and other groups like that are really good at organizing. LA Voice is good. CLU, Clergy and Laity, United for Economic Justice, they're really good. Connect with those larger groups. But mostly, what is the quality of relationship? Are we able in this space to have honest conversations about discomfort, shame, and fear? Do we each know what moves our hearts and why we're here? Have we walked this neighborhood and learned what's on the hearts of people who are here? Who is Bartimaeus crying by the side of the road as we sit in here? If we're walking by down Colorado Avenue and someone is asking for money, whether or not we give money or not, do we stop and say, hi, my name's Mike. What's your name? Can we talk? Would you be interested in just sharing a story? There's questions that can open up things that everyone has an answer to. Where are you from is a great one. Where you grew up. Are you from around here? What's your name? How are we getting to know each other? We're being rapidly resegregated as a society. There's really awful data about this. And that is an active strategy to keep us disconnected from each other. And so the best way we can organize is to do those things, to dive deep together, to take the time to get to know each other. And then also to sometimes the side of the road where Bartimaeus is crying out is 8 miles from here. And it's hard to hear the cries. What are the places that are least like the community where you live? How can we go there together? Not as tourists looking to consume, not as missionaries looking to fix and change, but as pilgrims who are looking to be changed and to recognize that as we go into these places, that we are walking on the holy ground of each other's lives. I don't know if that answers your question at all.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Well, we'll hang out. I'm sure Mike will be around for a little while longer. That's cool. I want to thank everybody for being here today, and I want to thank Mike especially for being here and presenting. Awesome. Thank you. And as a tradition here at Central, we always close our service with what we call a joint benediction. Excuse me, and here it is up on the screen. If you'd like to say this with us, please do. As we go from this place, we commit ourselves to the path of love, honesty, and humility. We dedicate ourselves, as Christ did, to the cause of justice and the courageous embrace of this life, this world, and each other. Amen. And then the other thing I was supposed to say was, if you're interested in getting on the email list, the church email list, and get our broadcast, we will not spam you. You can talk to Julie. Yeah. There you go. Thanks, everybody. Go in peace.
Thank you. It was good? Okay. It wasn't too much, or like, I tend to go off.
It was great.
Okay.
It was great.
Okay.
It was inspiring and practical and
okay.
Thanks.
Yeah. I mean, there's no silver bullet. It's just relationship.
My name's Rusty Harding.
Hey, Rusty. You look familiar.
Thanks for listening in on this week's edition of the Central Cast. Hope you enjoyed it, and hope you join us next time. Bye-bye.